Verbeter de wereld met vork en mes. Mijn naam is Esther Molenwijk en dit is Studio Plantaardige. Vandaag gaan we eens gluren bij de buren. Want in Denemarken is iets bijzonders aan de hand. In het land van bacon en butter heeft de politiek een serieus actieplan richting plantaardige productie en consumptie gepresenteerd. Inclusief een budget van 200 miljoen euro. Het leek me dat wij er wel wat van kunnen leren. Dus ik nodigde Rune-Christoffer Dragsdahl uit. Hij leidt de Vegetarian Society of Denmark en hij was de drijvende kracht achter dit plan. Ik maak me op voor een lesje strategische beleidsbeïnvloeding. Hoe krijg je de brede groene achterban op één lijn? En hoe win je zelfs de rechtse politici voor dit doel? Hello Rune-Christoffer. So that's what we'll be talking about.
Great, yeah, I understood everything.
You did? Yeah, I only said nice things about you. So let's set the scene here a little bit for the listeners, because we're actually located in a hotel room. In your hotel room in the Conscious Hotel Amsterdam, because you're here at Plant Forward to speak tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking much forward to that.
Yes. Great. Well, let's hope the neighbors keep quiet for
Yes.
this hour. It's quite a nice and cozy setting. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on, I think, what happened 2 weeks ago, because you have been able to get the large Danish pig producer on its knees, right?
Yeah, that was quite unexpected. Yeah.
So tell us what happened.
Yeah, so what happened 2 weeks ago was that the Danish Crown, which is Europe's largest pig exporter and a major company in Denmark on animal foods, and an association for many pig farmers in Denmark, admitted to the Supreme Court of Denmark that they had been misleading consumers. And they basically said that we and the climate movement of Denmark, both of us, were right in all our charges against them. So we'd been running, this lawsuit for several years.
Several years?
And then it went through the High Court, where we partially won. And then we appealed it to the Supreme Court. And then they actually came out and said, okay, you're right, guys. We've misled consumers. We want to stop this case now. Just leave us alone. That's not what they said, but that's
basically what they meant.
But we reached that point that they preferred to move onwards instead of continuing to fight us because they probably could see that they had a pretty bad case at the Supreme Court as well.
Yeah, well, I read the statement on their website, and actually it was quite unambiguous. They said, we are responding affirmatively to the claims in the case about the climate-controlled pig, right? Because that's what they called their pigs, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and they also said, what was it? Danish pig is more climate-friendly than you think.
Yes. Yeah, and it's like now 3 years ago, they made this big advertisement campaign saying Danish pigs are more climate friendly than you think. They spent around 1 million euros running a major campaign on that. That was visible in many places. And at the same time, they put this label on all their pork products saying climate controlled pig. They put that sticker on all their pork meat in all the supermarkets. So that combination of that campaign and the actual labeling, those were the two things that we decided to file a lawsuit to test whether this was legal according to the Danish marketing law. Because the argument from our side and the Danish climate movement is really that this is misleading consumers generally because pork is not a climate-friendly product. So saying more climate-friendly than you think, you still create an association to something climate-friendly in the minds of consumers, even though they are creative saying more than and you think.
Exactly. So
but those are marketing
still
tricks. And we said we want to test can you really get around the marketing law simply by using such creative tactics? We don't think that can be possibly legal because that opens a very, very wide floodgate to all sorts of too creative claims that are just confusing consumers. And then secondly, there was this scheme where they put climate-controlled pork. And again, you create this association that this product is somehow helping us to control the climate, or that the climate might be under control, It's just wrong because pork production, it certainly has a lower climate impact than beef. That's for sure. We acknowledge that. But it is still very highly climate intensive, especially because it needs a lot of fodder, which is grown, for example, in South America, where it destroys the rainforest, also causing huge carbon emissions. So to make any association between climate friendliness or climate controlled and pork, we said we can't believe that this is legal. It can't possibly be. And eventually then the High Court said, you're right, climate controlled was an empty scheme. There was not a real control in it. So we are happy and feeling proud that we took the case. And it's a big thing, for two small green NGOs to file a lawsuit against a multi-billion dollar national meat company.
Yeah, for the listeners, Danish Crown is a bit like Vion in the Netherlands, right? A very big, mostly pork-oriented meat company. Yeah,
they are.
Yeah, and that was a big thing to take on.
And it was. And when we did it, of course, we were also considering, is this seen as the vegetarians just being against the meat company or something like that? So that's why it was really important for us that we did it together with the climate movement, showing that this is a broader case about climate truth, about not misleading consumers about climate claims. Yeah. But then we were very happy to be, carrying that case forward.
Yep. Yeah. So let's get into your big national action plan that you've been able to realize in Denmark. To start off, you said, I read an article of you where you said, if this can happen in Denmark, it can happen anywhere. So tell me, why was it so unlikely to happen in Denmark?
Yes, so I think it's actually nice that you started asking about this lawsuit against Danish Crown, because it also sets the context that we are a country in Denmark with a huge pig production and a huge dairy production as well.
28 million pigs, if I'm correct, annually. Yeah.
So it is really big, lots of pigs, and a lot of it is being exported. And we have a strong, powerful pig lobby as well that has kept the production like that and even increased it over decades. Only in the recent years it has somehow stagnated. So it's in that context, in a country which is so famous for its bacon, but also butter and dairy products, and famous for the animal production, for the livestock production, then that a country like that publishes a national action plan for plant-based foods in such a place. To me, that really shows that it can even happen in places where you feel
where you feel
impossible.
Like the Netherlands, where you feel like it's impossible,
where it can be overwhelming. Even in these countries, it's possible for these kind of things to happen.
Yeah. And the Danish population, we actually tend to think of them as being very progressive and left-wing, and in my view, they're all vegetarians. But I guess I'm quite wrong there too, right? They even seem to eat more meat than the Netherlands.
Yeah. Actually, for decades, Denmark's meat consumption has been quite a bit higher than both like Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, the United Kingdom, these kind of countries we would usually compare with. And it seems like for many years there's just something very conservative in Denmark. It's related to the idea that meat has to be there in all lunch and dinner meals for a lot of people, and that has been like that for decades. And part of it might, of course, be related to clever marketing for years, but also to the fact that it is really, really cheap. It's sold at ridiculously low prices because of that very huge production we have. It has reached an economics of scale where it simply is becoming... They can sell it very cheaply, and on top of that, we have retailers who use it to allure customers into the store by dumping the prices of pork.
Maybe even below the cost, below the price which they pay. Yeah.
So we are in a challenging situation where we can see over the last 5-10 years, meat consumption is falling in Denmark, but just barely, a little. It is falling a little. Yeah.
I looked up some national Danish dishes, and they do look quite meaty actually. Mostly pork, I believe, and bacon, and So despite this setting, this strong agricultural lobby and big meat-eating country, you and the Vegetarian Society of Denmark decided to do some policy work towards a plant-based plan. Where did you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like we're a 127-year-old organization, but 10 years ago we were all a voluntary organization, and I was also a volunteer at that time. We hired our first employee in 2014-15, another person half-time. Then I started working in 16, unpaid, but gradually we've been growing, and now we have 19 staff. But in 2016, in an early moment when we were trying to look into, so what should we undertake? What possibilities are there? Two simultaneous things happened. One, we did have a board member, his name was Jeffrey, who was saying we should try to look more into if we can affect policies somehow.
Yeah, because up to then you've been doing like sharing recipes or
Yeah.
informing people or more like...
Sharing recipes,
Yeah.
organizing a few events a year, trying
Yeah.
to reach out to some supermarkets, but that was the early stages at that time.
Yeah.
And then
So
he
you
said,
want to upskill towards
Yeah.
political influencing.
yes.
Yeah.
But then he said, let's try to book a meeting with a political... He had a contact in one of the very green and left-wing parties. So we booked a meeting with two of these parties. Some years later, he left the board, but I have been continuing doing the policy work and building up the organization with other colleagues. But it's just to say that everything starts with someone saying, let's try this.
Yeah, let's be a bit more
yeah,
ambitious.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
But also at the same time, in around 15, 16, we had received many actually vegetarians and vegans who were having problems in hospitals or elderly people's nursing homes, daycare institutions, with getting proper vegetarian or vegan meals. So we also felt, we saw in Portugal that our sister organization there, the Vegetarian Association in Portugal, had managed to get it through politically, a national law ensuring that there should always be a 100% plant-based meal available in all public institutions. So we were inspired by that and felt, let's try to get this in Denmark too. So that's actually the first thing we started trying to fight for politically here in Denmark. Now, 7.5 years later, we still don't have that in Denmark, that plant-based option.
Yeah.
But instead, a lot of other stuff has happened. And I think that's a key point in itself. I think some of these things, of course, we've done strategically, consciously. Other things we can see in retrospective were really good moves or bad moves.
Yeah.
But
You have to see your opportunities along the way.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I usually stress is that identifying some initial policy proposals that are very difficult to be against. And at least, even if the politicians won't support them, they are conversation starters that they will listen to, and you can open doors. So actually asking for a plant-based option in all public kitchens was one of the first things we asked for politically. And that's a reasonable ask that is difficult for any party, whether it's right-wing or left-wing. How can you be against that? That was a good way to start a conversation about the food served in the public kitchens, the need to educate, train the staff, etc.
Yeah.
But also another example is also around 1718, we were inspired by some calculations done in other countries on the health economic benefits of eating more plant-based. And there was some global calculations by Oxford University. There were some specific calculations from Belgium and the UK. And then Norway had also done one on what if we follow the dietary guidelines. And there were some very large savings in the Norwegian calculation. It was a large amount of money, and Norway has a smaller population than Denmark. So we brought these calculations forward to some politicians and said, can we get this similar calculation in Denmark? Because sometimes if you do policy work, we should really start with the lowest hanging fruit sometimes.
Yeah, and health is one of those low-hanging fruits, you feel.
Or even more specifically, getting a calculation of an economic effect.
Yeah.
That's not a lot to ask for. It's just a calculation.
Yeah, that's right.
But by asking for that calculation, initially when some politicians asked a minister in the government at that time, there was just a short, superficial reply to it that, sure, there will be health care savings. That's it. And then what they eventually did was they made a calculation just on following the dietary guidelines. But that is still a massive saving, and the effect for the average Danish citizen of following dietary guidelines compared to what they eat now, the main difference is eating much less meat and much more plants. So finally, the minister ordered that calculation from University of Copenhagen. They published it, and we got this number showing that the saving is between, depending on how many in the population follow it, depending if everyone does it or if it's just the average population.
Yeah.
So between 1 to 3 billion euros a year.
Yeah.
And although I even feel that number is lower than it probably is in reality, I think they've excluded some factors in the calculations, but still 1 to 3 billion euros. That's a number that we can keep using again and again and again and again. Every time people are saying, this is too expensive, you're asking for money, why should we spend money on this? We can always say, look, they're multi-billion euro per year savings for our healthcare system.
Yeah.
And people will work more, pay more taxes, less sick days because they are healthier.
Sure.
And that has been extremely valuable to get that calculation. So identifying these kind of things that are initially not costing a lot, but that can pave the way for more substantial actions later.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great sales technique as well, because they've done the calculation, the ministry, and they're already involved in your plan. And then they kind of have to do something with their calculation rather than you do it, or you have some consultant or university making. So you're a good salesman in the end.
Well, but also so are the politicians who managed to convince the minister. But I still think it's nice. Of course, we are fortunate to have some great politicians in various parties who are also good at doing this, but there's a good collaboration between us and them. So it's not just the usual most left-wing or most green party, but there are actual multiple contacts in multiple parties who know us and respect us. And that is something that is built up over the years by generally coming with accurate, solid scientific data where we try not to exaggerate the numbers. If there are different numbers, we aim for a lower one or a medium one. And that generally we can see for quite a few key politicians, it has been important for them to initially get to know us a bit, then get some data from us. And then if they use that data and they are not being attacked afterwards, then they start trusting us.
Yeah.
Because if we feed them wrong information, they would be angry and feel like we can't trust these guys. We better not use them again.
So one of the lessons we learn here is be a very trustworthy partner to the politicians. Yeah. And also to not just the left-wing politicians who you already have as allies, basically, but also the other ones. Yeah. And let's go into to the arguments a little bit, because I think you also focus quite a lot on job creations and on market potential, right?
Yeah.
These were the key factors to convince also the more right-wing politicians.
Yeah, and of course I should say here, there's many stakeholders, who have been part of this whole process. There are researchers who appear in the media, who come with talk about prospects about the market as well, who may also talk about the job creation. There's a plant-based business association in Denmark, which is an organization with like 3 staff and like 90 companies who are members, so quite successful. So I just want to say that, of course, there are many players out there who advance these arguments, but often we have been the ones who've had the actual resources to draw the data, to set it up in some graphics, to make some small policy briefs of a few pages and send it to politicians. Yeah, so that's what we often would be doing. Yeah.
Could you give me an indication of, like, when you said the economic potential and the job creation? What was the range? How much did you estimate that it would help the market?
Yeah. So what we've done there is, there's especially a few years ago when there was a very big hype about the plant-based market globally, and when Beyond Meat, when the stock was soaring, at that time many banks and analysts' houses around the world were making their own calculations about the future global market. So what we did was, instead of just quoting one of them, we put 10 different prognoses into one chart. So we cannot promise you that this particular analysis is correct, but at least all of these agree that this is going to grow a lot.
Somewhere in the millions or billions even? Or
no, billion. Yeah. Globally, we're talking about...
Globally, yes.
Yeah, it's around, if I remember correctly, it's like the prognosis, Bloomberg's for 2030 was $140 billion. Credit Suisse's for 2050 they have 2 scenarios, but the most far-going scenario was $1,400 billion. So pretty huge amounts. But it's, of course, always a qualified guess, an estimate. But a major thing that happened was that we started something we called Danish Network for Plant Proteins in 2020. Which is a network for professionals where we hold seminars, conferences, where people can meet, learn, get educated on this topic. You can say, learn new stuff, meet each other over lunch and in the breaks. We have like 220 professional members. So there were mainly 3 products of that network. One thing that happened was that we ourselves got inspired to reach out to Organic Denmark, to the Organic Farmers Association, and say, let's collaborate more because we have some common values, and let's create a plant-based knowledge center together, kind of a platform where we collaborate on various projects from farm to fork. Secondly, the largest farmers association, the conventional farmers association that includes the pigs and the dairy farmers.
I think that would be LTO in the Netherlands, just for the Dutch listeners, but that's probably the equivalent in Denmark.
Yes.
So you collaborated with the LTO of Denmark.
Similar. Yeah. And the thing is, they attended this conference we had in the parliament, in the building, the first one. They were in the panel. They attended this and some of the other events, and they felt this was a constructive atmosphere.
Okay.
So they invited us to a joint research and development strategy for plant-based foods, because they felt, although they of course know we disagree about a lot of stuff regarding animals.
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah.
But promoting plants, developing the plant-based sector, they agreed on the need for that. So that's why they invited us to do this together. That was the second thing, right? And then the third thing was that 4 other green NGOs, that would be Greenpeace and the Nature Conservation Society of Denmark, Animal Protection Denmark, and Green Transition Denmark, and us, together with the Plant-Based Business Association, made a joint report, a vision report, which we called From Feed to Food. Uh-huh. And that, in many ways was a classic NGO report. You have these 5 green NGOs who are telling how terrible current agricultural production is, destroying climate, nature, biodiversity, all of the problems related to it. Yeah. And then everyone agreed it should also be about the potential of the plant-based market and a future where all the animals should be only organic and free range, extensive production, much less animals, more nature. So overall, we think a beautiful vision that all the NGOs can clap in their hands about and feel, wow, this is how we want the world to look like. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing there, by having the Plant-Based Business Association there, they were saying, look, guys, these NGO reports, they always start with telling about the problems in the world. Why don't we this time start the report with telling about the potential, the market potential? And then there was some discussion back and forth. But it was decided, okay, we'll start with the market potential. Then we tell about all the concrete solutions. And then at the end, there is sort of an appendix telling about all the problems.
By the way, this production is going wrong. Yeah. I'll take this as a second very important lesson. Yeah. Start with the opportunities rather than with the environmental disasters.
Yes, yeah. And I really think it mattered because afterwards, when we then approached the Ministry of Food and Agriculture and also the Ministry of Commerce and Trade, and even approaching various political parties, when they opened this report, they actually get interested and they want to read more and more. If they open the report and immediately they're reading the same stuff, which is very true that it is destroying our nature and environment, biodiversity, climate-wise, a disaster. But they've heard that so many times that they become immune to it, and it just would probably often more likely make them close the report or feel like, I don't want to read this again. I know it, come on. So actually by focusing on what we want more of instead of what we want less of, that's a key message that has been very important.
So, Rune-Christoffer, we've been talking for quite a while now on how you did it, but I could imagine that the listeners are quite curious, like, what actually happened? What does this National Action Plan look like that you achieved in 2021, I believe? Yeah. So, can you tell me, what does it consist of?
Yeah, so actually the deal itself is a larger agricultural deal. And I will answer your question, but I just want to stress an important point here again, that it was a deal that some parts of the deal are still maintaining conventional animal industrial agriculture. Another part of the deal invests in more organic farming. But then the new thing was that it included in this deal of, I don't remember, 8 pages or something like that, there was a full page on plant-based initiatives. And that was entirely brand new, never seen before. And in that deal, it was mentioned that there should be the creation of a fund. It's later been dubbed the Plant-Based Food Grant, with approximately 100 million euros. And also that there should be a national action plan for plant-based foods. and by the way, also an eco scheme under the EU's Common Agricultural Policy with subsidies for farmers who are growing plant-based foods.
Yeah.
That EU, under the Common Agricultural Policy scheme itself, has been a bit diluted later on in the sense that they can still feed it to animals if they can't sell it to human consumption.
So let's dive into that one a little bit more. So farmers who decide to grow food which is suitable for humans instead of feed for animals, they receive a subsidy. Is that appealing enough for farmers? How much is it?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the amount. I was just looking into the amount recently. I think it's a bit less than 100 euros per hectare. Mm-hmm. So it is an incentive, which means if they don't do it, they will overall lose funding that they had before. But it's also not a lot, and it has been discussed, should it be higher to stimulate, to give a higher incentive? But there was also some skeptical voices saying, if you just give them incentives to grow it, but we don't establish a proper trade channel, whether it's if we don't increase domestic consumption or if we cannot sell it, export it at market prices, eventually the farmers might have to dump it at really low, with a loss even internationally. Yeah. But what has happened is actually that quite many farmers have grown, have made some trial fields, tried to jump on this plant-based agenda.
So it's already changing.
Yeah, but so that's the thing here. And the bit sad thing is, so many of them have done it, and maybe it's just small quantities here and there. They've done it, but then they've complained, but we couldn't sell it. So they're frustrated and they feel like the market was not as promising as they were promised. And this is where there are two things to say about this, that I think. One of them is that it certainly shows the importance of stimulating consumption, of building value chains, of the public sector, for example, taking responsibility. And that also means politicians making decisions in Denmark. And they have postponed that, unfortunately, making some actual targets, for example, for public consumption. So that is a problem. Mm-hmm. Another argument one could use is that saying that, we have some very powerful cooperatives, like Danish Crown is technically a cooperative. So is Arla, these big animal giants.
Arla is, I would say, the Friesland Campina of Denmark, basically, to give people a reference. We have some Arla in the Netherlands as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And these two companies, they could, if they really wanted, I think if they took ownership of this, they could have gathered all that extra production of pulses and channeled it into something meaningful, developing some really good products. But it's because they are not taking it seriously enough, as I see it. Danish Crown and Arla, they do have visions, they do have some targets. They are entering the plant-based market. They are really, both of them. But they are spending too little on product development, so the products are not good enough. And it's too half-heartedly,
We'll get into the demand side later. Maybe go on to the grant that was given for plant-based business, for developing plant-based businesses. What does that grant entail?
Yeah, so the plant-based food grant is this like a funding structure which has been set up. There are 11 board members. One board member directly appointed by the Minister of Food and Agriculture, and then 10 board members appointed by 10 different interest organizations. And so there's funding, the total 100 million euros, and they have added even more funding later recently. That funding is over several years, but in the first round there was around 8 million euros. And the second round, which is currently had a deadline recently, was 15 million euros. The next 2 years there will be 50 million euros each time. But I think it's likely it might be even more because they have added more funding regularly, and they can see that there's a huge number of applications, and I would argue a huge number of qualified applications.
So for instance, if I would want to start a plant-based, let's say I make plant-based shrimp or whatever, plant-based pork, and I want to start a business in Denmark, would I be able to apply for such a grant? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's tricky. The grant can cover many kind of things. It can cover product development. Mm-hmm. It can cover something that a startup is working on. So if it is about improving a product or the taste or texture of something, yes, it's possible, and there are applications received for that. In theory, one company could apply for funding, but we're also curious in how collaborations can take place. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if the company applies together with some scientists from a university or a technological institute on how to improve the texture and flavor or something like that.
Yep.
Or if some companies apply together to going for a joint expo abroad, or if some companies are applying together on how to introduce their products better to the retail sector. Or it can just be industry associations who send applications on behalf of a broader sector work. Could be
So it's
that.
basically really developing work in the plant-based food scene.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the grants can also be given to, for example, teaching kitchen professionals in the public sector kitchens how to cook plant-based dishes. It can be a project about how to introduce proper plant-based, you can say, products or foods in parts of the meals in hospitals. It can be nudging experiments in conference centers. It can be a benchmarking of the retail sector. It can be developing teaching materials for the teachers who teach, for example, the subject food science. So like there's a whole range of things you can apply for and get funding for.
Yeah.
But also importantly, these kind of things that create structural change. For example, a grant was given to the hospitality school to develop 100% vegetarian chef's education. It can even be taken fully vegan, the education. And that has received a grant to develop the curriculum for it. Then once that curriculum is developed, then actually the government, through normal government structures, will support the education. But it has allowed them to be able to develop a new education where you can now do a full chef's training, 100% vegetarian.
This is something we can only dream of in the Netherlands.
But it's just nice, right? But I think, and it's not that that in itself was like 500,000 euros to develop that new education. But I mean, it just shows the value of having a funding structure which is multi-year and where you can regularly assess what are the needs right now and where everyone can apply in an open competition, because otherwise the risk is that governments may change and come and fall and go, and maybe they can agree about what is needed in 2021, but it might be another need in 2023 or 2025 or 2027.
Yeah, so let's take this as a third lesson to try to get something over for multi-year, basically. Like
multi-year and a fund with a broad scope.
Yeah.
Of course, the risk by having such a broad scope is that it can support almost anything plant-based. But of course, the fund can make strategical priorities from year to year if it wants to narrow the scope.
Yeah.
But currently, we need a broad, to really stimulate plant-based development, we need everything from farm to fork.
Let's get into the final thing, which is the Danish National Actieplan for plant-based foods, which was to stimulate the demand. And to be very honest, I was slightly disappointed by reading this in terms of missing some real tangible targets. I mean, what would you say is the most valuable thing that's in this plan?
So I would say there are three valuable things at different levels, you can say. The first thing, actually having a government making a national action plan for plant-based foods with that name.
We don't have that.
In a world where a lot of governments are still a bit hostile or skeptical or don't really know, you can see that there are efforts to attack plant-based here and there in different countries. Just having a government that stands behind it and says, let's make an action plan for this. That's in itself positive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they had a process where they asked the different ministries to deliver their inputs for their respective ministries. So it also creates that effect that the multiple ministries within the government are now being made aware and being told that you should reflect on what you can contribute with here. So it somehow neutralizes or normalizes plant-based in the political field. Second effect, which I also think is valuable, is that actually the words being used, the rhetoric being used, again has an effect. It says, and the first sentence is, plant-based foods are the future. And that's signed by the Minister of Food and Agriculture, who is a conventional farmer from a center right-wing party, which is usually the Farmers' Party. That is a strong message. Yeah. And in that same introduction, which he's signing, it also lists up war in Ukraine, climate change, environment, health and nutrition issues. It lists a lot of global problems, and then it writes, plant-based foods are part of the solution to all these problems. Just that recognition
of a minister.
And of a full government. if more governments just did that, we'd reach a new point, a new stage in the global discussion on that this is at least part of the solution. Come on, guys. But then at a more concrete level then, when you read through the report, and that was our big disappointment, was there was no quantified measurable targets or anything like that.
There's no true protein pricing, for instance. There's no prohibition of meat advertisements. There's no real target for supermarkets, for instance, or even for public schools or public spendings on food.
Yeah, and we will keep asking for this. We've said that their response was that they felt they didn't have a proper baseline for it. But that said, I also like to be optimistic and look at what is there. And there are things in it which are not quantifiable, but which are still intentions that can be measured somehow. For example, it does say the Danish embassies should work more on how to export plant-based foods. It also says Denmark would like to take an active role at EU level towards more plant-based foods. It says the government is committed to allocate more funding for research and development for plant-based foods. And they wrote that in the action plan, and you can say that's not quantifiable. They just say they want to add more funding. But a few weeks later, they did add 5 million euros extra. So that's an example that when you write something like this, when you make this action plan, it can still influence other stuff later.
Yeah. At some point, you have to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah. And another example is just a few weeks ago, the Danish government published a strategy on green jobs in the food and agriculture sector. And to my very big and positive surprise, they explicitly state that jobs in the animal sector are challenged in these years, but there may be new jobs emerging in the plant-based sector. Bravo. So that recognition that is transferred throughout the government, I think some of that can be traced back to everyone having to contribute to an action plan. Yeah. Another thing is there soon there will be published new guidelines on how to implement the dietary guidelines in public kitchens. So yes, it's frustrating. Why can't they just put some measurable targets? It sends a signal, it shows a direction, but it doesn't mean that there are not actual actions, and it does have effects. It's frustrating that it's vague, but we can still see that things are happening.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one thing I also wanted to get into is you said we should emphasize what we want more of, which is plant-based, and not emphasize what we want less of, which is the animal agriculture. But in the end, we do want less of the animal agriculture. It's actually much more important that we break down the existing structure of animal agriculture than that we grow more fava beans, for instance. So, what are you doing to ensure that actually the animal agriculture is being broken down?
Yeah, it's...
You feel like it's a painful question?
No, actually not. I was an anthropology student in 2006 when the FAO published the report called Livestock's Long Shadow,
I know that one.
Which was what started the modern debate about this. Before that, it was just fringe, small green NGOs, vegans and vegetarians, and a few old hippie green NGOs who really took this seriously. It's only after that report that Greenpeace and many others came after it. After that a lot of scientists started making more research about this whole area. So that was saying the livestock sector is one of the 2 to 3 largest environmental problems in the world at all levels from local to global, right? So it's a huge, massive problem. So we keep stressing that in a lot of public debate situations. What I distinguish between is sending the message in the public debate. Also, you can say eschewing Danish crown, saying this is not climate friendly. We can come with messages on TV, radio, in op-eds, in conferences, about the problems and the risks with the animal sector. But when we then move to solutions politically, I do not think it is a solution in itself just, for example, to buy out animal farmers or to you can say, to just make a reduction target for animal production. Because ultimately, people have to produce and eat something else instead. So we do need to actually show the positive alternative. So that's why I do think that, again, in terms of the debate, in terms of making clear how unjust the current system is. For example, the subsidies are favoring animal products. And that is something we will currently be contributing with in the current. Denmark is negotiating soon the world's first carbon tax on agriculture. It appears to be sure it will happen, but you never know.
So let's explain that quickly. Carbon tax on agriculture basically means that farmers will have to pay a tax on their activities, and livestock farmers most likely will have to pay much higher tax because they have more carbon activities, which will make meat more expensive.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
But even in that, where was my point?
Well, my question was how are we going to actually break down the animal agriculture? And do you feel like this climate tax can help in that?
Yeah, so the climate tax can definitely help with that. And I think one of our contributions in this debate that we are going to be launching soon is actually to create a lot of public awareness about, now the animal farmers are complaining to be burdened with this tax. And then we actually want to show them, the politicians and the general public, that the current subsidies are favoring intensive animal production so much more than plant-based that it's actually making the animal products artificially much cheaper. Mm-hmm. And that is unfair to the plant-based producers. Mm-hmm. So actually when they're complaining about this new tax, that tax will just be a fraction of the current injustice. So by entering the debate with that argument, that's of course, you can say that's also attacking the current system. But part of that package of the political deals has to be about what is the alternative we want to build. Mm-hmm. And that, I do believe, is about spending enough money to actually make sure there's enough research and development, a stimulating, innovative environment for startups to develop some tasty, delicious, affordable alternatives, but also educating the public, educating the chefs, educating the public kitchens. And these are the things we need to create a true alternative. Because the argument by the livestock industry that no, we're just moving the production abroad if we remove it in our country, right? And part of that argument is a bit... Because, but we can't destroy our own argument just for the sake of exporting meat to the rest of the world, right? We should also protect our own environment. But I do still think there is a very valid point that also we do need to change our consumption.
This is the most important part of all, of course.
And if we want to change global consumption, we have to start with the rich countries. So to get that full domino effect or circle drops that create circle in the water effect, it is really important what we do to stimulate the alternatives, to make that alternative world where plants are the norm and animal products are more an exception. That has to be created to a beautiful vision that a meaningful business, beautiful vision, but also business viable solution. And we need to actually make the farmers and the public see that as a meaningful alternative.
And from there on, you think the demand will also grow? Yeah,
I think so. So if we try to destroy the animal production too quickly, we just end up getting a lot of resistance and anger. And then what is the alternative? Then the alternative, that's what they're arguing, is that then intensive livestock production in China or Poland, like what? So we have to show the alternative we want to create also. So these things go hand in hand. Yeah. Ideally for me would of course be a carbon tax and an environment tax where the revenue is used to stimulate plant-based development. Yeah. That would be the ideal world.
Yes. One thing I found very interesting and learningful is that you have been working closely together with Organic Denmark. Yeah. And in the Netherlands, these seem to be quite different worlds. And actually, they might have quite some opposing views as well. Especially our organic sector is quite against all sorts of processed foods. I was on the organic trade show this year, and I wasn't even able to get oat milk, which you can get like everywhere nowadays. And at the same time, they might be very much in favor of higher animal welfare, etc. Whereas the vegans find welfare even a difficult word because they don't want any animal agriculture. How did you manage to get those two worlds together and put them under one umbrella with a shared vision to approach the government?
I think it was really important. Like personally, I've grown up with a lot of organic food. So personally, it's close to me, and that's not entirely irrelevant because if you want two organizations which with possibly aligned interests, but also some possibly conflicting interests. To get closer to each other, there needs to be personal trust at leadership level. We might have many members who are strongly for organic. There will also be many organically minded people who are eating much more plant-based. But you'll still need to create that kind of trust, because there are vegan activists who demonstrate outside the organic farmers because they feel they're the ones they should target instead of the conventional farmers, because they feel organic farmers and organic consumers are easier to convince to move towards vegan. And at the same time, you will have some organic cattle farmers who are feeling frustrated that the vegans or vegetarian movement is stealing away some of their market by people who used to be buying organic animal products are now moving into plant-based maybe. So that can create some tension. But I think here it really matters that the three core focuses of the organic movement is, environment, human health, and animals. And those are the same thing that the vegetarian vegan movement revolves around. So they are the same things we're trying to address. And I do think people from the organic movement and people from the vegan vegetarian movement who don't address that we are very natural allies to a large extent, they are blind.
So did you have conflict sometimes within this strategic collaboration?
No, I won't say that we've had that at all. It's about having respect for each other, understanding that the organic farmers, the organic Denmark still represents a lot of animal producers. But by seeing that what they are aiming for is also less but better, that will reduce the livestock production. When people buy organic animal products, and whether it's private consumption, but also in professional kitchens in Denmark, when they, for example, have aiming towards getting organic percentage to 60% or even 90%, the only way they can do that within their current budget is by lowering animal product consumption. So one of the most effective ways to advance plant-based products in a lot of professional kitchens in Denmark has been through these kitchens setting an organic target, which they reach through advancing plants. So we should love that. That's a wonderful way to get more people on board. But then also vice versa, what we can offer the organic movement is, because yes, the organic movement, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you have a huge labor force which has low salaries, you can afford having a lot of labor. But organic production is more labor intensive if you want the same yields. So in an industrial, like European, you can say organic setting, the yields are lower. So the organic movement has a problem about justifying itself when the yields are lower, because it does mean that your productivity is lower, means you need more areas, so then might be more pressure on biodiversity, less forests, etc.
For instance, the eco-modernist view, they say you should grow as intensively as you can, so that you have as much land you can spare for nature.
Exactly, but that's then when the organics, then they have then recognized in Denmark clearly and explicitly for many years. And it seems to me that some of the organic movement in other parts of Europe, maybe not yet entirely recognizing that. From country to country it may differ. But, for the organic movement to be able to justify itself in a world where we need to feed enough people and have more forest, the organic vision it's part of the organic in the original sense means, holistic view. That's the whole idea of the word that comes out of a holism. And that view entails a balance with much less animals and largely plant-centered, plant-based diets where animal products are much fewer than today. So I think to be a little edgy here, maybe provoking some organic movement people in other countries, is that honestly speaking, the organic movement in Denmark has embraced science in this regard, accepting that yes, to justify our vision of the world, we need a much more plant-based world food system. Otherwise, we can't justify it. That it goes hand in hand. And then it seems to me that parts of the organic movement in other countries are still kind of rejecting that and somehow having this a bit strange idea that it's just about making it all organic, and then not understanding then you do need much less animals in that scenario. And some people are trying to avoid to accept that.
And what about the fact that they're quite reluctant towards meat alternatives to processed foods? Did that cause a lot of friction within your alliance?
not within our alliance, but I would say there are people within the organic movement in Denmark who have been hesitant to the meat imitations. What I think the saying that we should try to aim towards products that are meat imitations, but let's try to use organic ingredients. Let's try also to make healthier versions of them, instead of ultra processed, maybe medium processed, or, using fermentation techniques to achieve the juicy and umami like texture and taste. Yeah. And then, for example, a lot of the meat substitutes around the world are using protein isolates, where you have removed the protein, so you're throwing away the fiber and a lot of the vitamins and minerals. But an alternative to that is protein concentrate. Protein concentrate still retains the fiber and some of the minerals. It's a choice.
Basically make them less processed.
The industry can make a choice between protein isolate and protein concentrate, and there are similar other examples, or aiming more for fermentation. And you can still make juicy things that imitate meat texture and tastes. Yeah. And that has been helpful to show the organic movement that this is not an opposition.
I think thereby we can sort of reach, I believe I was at number 4, at the 4th big lesson that we can learn from this, is to team up with the organic movement and to overcome each other's differences in terms of processed foods and to find some way in between. Although I have to say that I believe your organic industry is about like 12% of the land, and in the Netherlands it's like 3 or 4%. So we have some way to go there.
It might be because it's larger in Denmark, then it has also become slightly more commercialized and a little more pragmatic. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Finally, Rune-Christoffer, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like you have quite a dark green heart. And I could imagine that doing this very strategic policy work, you have to paint yourself a little bit more light green. Is that what you did? To be more accessible to the politicians and to build these alliances, to even work with the pharma cooperation. Did you have to change yourself a little bit?
It's a really good question. I feel I'm always who I am. I grew up in Denmark. We have something called kind of boarding high schools. It's like course centers, usually in rural areas, which are meant like as lifelong education, places where people can take courses for a few weeks or some months as well. And I grew up in such a place. My father founded it many, many years ago. And these places in Denmark are generally characterized with historically being founded as a way to build a bridge between the rural and the urban, but also as being places where there's always space for dialogue and where there's always a high ceiling, where there's space to have that somehow debate even with people you strongly disagree with. So that is very, very deep and sincere in my heart. My mother, who turned vegetarian when she was 20, but she, in this boarding school, the food used to be, it's not boarding school, but like for adults, right? A place for lifelong learning, you can say. But it used to be serving vegetarian food all the time, but then when the courses became longer for multiple months, she introduced a day per week with meat.
Oh, really?
So that's the spirit I'm coming out from, growing up in a vegetarian family,
but
also with a mother who really believes in this. Like, if you really want to change the world, you also might need to give a bit and be a bit pragmatic and make others curious and open. So I think it's really sincere in me, and I think I can see my colleagues in our organization. We are really strongly idealistic. We are deeply concerned about the situation in the world, whether it's the treatment of animals, climate change, biodiversity loss, public health crisis. We are deeply concerned about it, but I really think we really truly believe that we can see that we are making change by acting pragmatically. So it has just become internalized. Any time where we feel somehow an open door or an interest or a curiosity, then there's no need to feel frustrated, because then we can see that person is on a journey and we are helping that person and organization on their journey. An expression I sometimes say is that I use my idealism to aim for the stars, but by my pragmatism ensures that I will forever have energy to aim towards the stars.
It's also about preserving yourself.
Yeah, because if I don't use that pragmatism, I think some of the people who just insist on, they would more quickly become disillusioned and burned out. Mm-hmm. The important thing is what creates change. So there can be specific meetings at random times for specific individuals, organizations, where I do have to suppress if they are reacting in a very rude, or where I really feel, oh God, they're living in a different century, and I think the more power people have, and the less they do, that can provoke me, because I think with power comes responsibility. But I would say by far the most people I talk with, I actually feel that it's moving somewhere in the right direction.
So let's also end this with the 5th important lesson is be pragmatic. I think that's a very important one. Thank you very much, Rune-Christoffer.
No, thank you, Esther.
Time to go to bed now for your speech tomorrow. I kept you for a long time.
But thank you for... Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Thank you for your work with your podcast.
Dat was hem. Dankjewel voor het luisteren. Deel je deze aflevering met iedereen die werkt aan een duurzamer voedselsysteem. En dan vooral ook met mensen in de biologische sector, want dat is een logische partner, zoals we net geleerd hebben. Als je meer van ons wilt horen, steun ons dan met een donatie. Dat kan via studioplantaardig.nl. Dank je en tot de volgende.